Every weekend we sit down in front of our televisions with our beer of choice, order a pizza, watch some mixed martial arts and take something for granted. Because a lot has to take place in order for an event to be successful. The logistics in making it all come together are simply overwhelming. Securing a venue, ticket sales, marketing, television production, insurance, and oh yeah, finding people are willing, good enough and healthy enough to step inside of a cage or ring and risk their safety against a trained killer for a paycheck. And it has to be entertaining to you savages watching live or at home. And it's nothing short of a small miracle when it all comes together. But when it doesn't, oh man, it doesn't. In a sport known for the bizarre and welcoming of the malcontents and outcasts of the sports world, the calamity that ensues when it all falls apart is as compelling as a car wreck that you have to stare at as you drive past. I'm Tom from MMA On Point, and these are 10 most disastrous events in MMA history. Number 10, UFC 119. The dreaded injury bug decided to strike upon UFC 119, ruining the original scheduled main event. And while Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez were rumored for the headlining spot, Frank Mir and Big Nog were booked to rematch, and when Nogueira dropped out, he was replaced with Mirko Cro Cop. And while that certainly wasn't a bad pairing, Indianapolis would be subjected to a painfully slow card. Uneventful fight after uneventful fight became the rule of the night, and there were a few finishes on the prelims, including the woefully bad Sean McCorkle and Mark Hunt bout, but even the heavy power pairing of Melvin Gillard and Jeremy Stevens resulted in a lackluster decision. The main event looked like much the same as Mir and Cro Cop did very little in the first 14 minutes of their fight. Even the commentary team was literally begging the fighters to open up and do more than clinch against the fence.
All right, Herb Dean's gonna separate them again.
You gotta throw a head kick now.
Please, someone.
And so in the final minute, Mir floored Cro Cop with a devastating knee to the head, but it was too little, too late for UFC 119, as Dana White was among those unhappy with the evening, and he expressed it by refusing to award a knockout of the night bonus to Mir, despite it being the lone KO on the card. Number 9, Strikeforce Nashville. In 2010, Strikeforce was firmly established as the world's number 2 promotion. Not only did they boast a great roster, they also had a broadcasting deal in place with CBS and Showtime. And with Scott Coker managing to snatch UFC's middleweight number 1 contender and former Pride champion Dan Henderson away, it was considered a major coup. The occasion was celebrated on CBS national television with a triple title headliner. All three went to decision and offered very little in the way of action many casual fans wanted. And the new promotional darling Henderson would lose to Strikeforce's 185-pound King Jake Shields. To make matters worse, Jason Miller, yeah, that guy who fought in the untelevised portion of the card, interrupted Shields' post-fight interview demanding a rematch. Shields' Cesar Gracie teammates, including Gilbert Melendez, who defended his lightweight title that evening, and the Diaz brothers quickly turned a light push into an all-out beatdown. The team swarmed on Mayhem as security and Henderson's team tried to regain order. Not only was it a lackluster card, but it would also be the final time Strikeforce would air on CBS, and it would also spawn one of the worst commentary calls in MMA history.
Sometimes these things happen in MMA. A lot of testosterone in the cage. Gentlemen, we're on national television.
Number 8, King of the Cage, Wet and Wild. It's not too often we see high-level mixed martial arts in an open-air arena, and there's a reason for that. Because in 2001, King of the Cage set up shop at the Sababa Casino in San Jacinto, California, and as Tony once said, unfortunately for everyone involved, the MMA gods took this as a challenge and partnered with Mother Nature to rain on the event. And living up to the name Wet and Wild, which is just a ridiculous name for an MMA event, the fights were certainly affected by the water on the cage floor. Punch attempts and takedowns had the added element of a water slide, as stability was hard to come by. The fighters just flailed around the cage, and almost every technique became 10 times more difficult to perform on a wet and slippery surface. Cage Ringside officials wore ponchos, and even ringing out to Bruce Buffer was wearing a coat so his trademark high fashion wasn't compromised. With names on the card like Rico Rodriguez, Paul Buenatello, Eve Edwards, Guy Mezger, and Marvin Eastman, it was a showcase of great fighters rudely interrupted by the whims of a rainy climate. Number 7, Pride 32. Pride Fighting Championships was arguably the #1 promotion in the world in 2006 when it suddenly lost a crucial television deal and faced some financial troubles. It is with this in the background that the company's US debut Pride 32 would take place. From the jump, this event was filled with logistical problems. The Japanese rule set had to be thrown out in favor of the unified rules. That means the strikes allowed, round time, and judging were completely different. Additionally, Pride planned on including the biggest names possible, but regulation halted them in their tracks. The NAC scrapped a Mark Hunt and Butterbean bout. Can you imagine that one? Vanderlei Silva's knockout loss to Cro Cop just a month earlier prevented his participation, since under Nevada rules he would still be medically suspended. Cro Cop himself was ruled out due to a foot injury despite being included in some of the early promotional material, and once everything started, the altered event took place without any more issues. Well, aside from Mark Coleman scaring the living crap out of his daughters after losing to Fedor Emelianenko, along with the dubious and tapless Phil Baroni submission win. But afterwards, it was clear that the lack of PED testing in Japan didn't follow the fighters stateside, as 3 of the fighters ran into testing issues. Pavel Nastula popped for nandrolone, Vitor Belfort was flagged, which is a total shocker, but Kevin Randleman takes the cake for submitting a fake urine sample, hoping to fool regulators. Rest in peace, Kevin. Don't worry, we've all tried it. Number 6, UFC 112. Ahead of UFC 112, Zuffa sold 10% of their ownership stake to the Abu Dhabi-based Flash Entertainment. And in an effort to impress their new business partners, Dana White and the Fertittas sought out some key talent to entertain them. Due to the lack of a suitable arena, a temporary outdoor structure was built at the Ferrari World theme park, and originally the plan was to have dominant middleweight champion Anderson Silva defend his title in a long-awaited bout against Vitor Belfort. However, the Phenom suffered a shoulder injury and was replaced with Damian Maia, and pretty much everything went according to plan on fight night, and there was little to complain about until Silva in the main event seemed like a lock for great highlight reel moments. Fresh off his destruction of Forrest Griffin months earlier, the Spider was set up for another memorable moment in a style matchup that heavily favored him. But instead of said destruction, Silva opted to have some sadistic fun throughout. He just battered Maia, paused to taunt him, and rinse and repeat. There were even moments where Silva literally started dancing. He even took the 4th round to run away around the octagon, dodge punches, and refused to engage. And by the 5th, Dan Miragliotta threatened to take a point away if the antics continued. Dana White was so upset with Silva that he refused to put the belt around his waist and went on a legendary tirade against the champion. To be fair, at least it didn't rain. Number 5, UFC 33 victory in Vegas. This event represented a huge moment for the UFC and the entire sport of MMA. At the time, mixed martial arts was barely clinging on to legality and acceptance as a legitimate sport. Zuffa purchased the company from SEG just months earlier, and for the first time were holding an event sanctioned by the Nevada State Athletic Commission under the recently formed unified rules. The new ownership was hopeful to put on a great display to entertain the fans and justify what was considered a risky purchase at the time. With 3 title fights at the top of the bill and one of the sport's few stars, Tito Ortiz, in the main event, everything was set for a great evening. That plan didn't exactly come to fruition, as every fight on the main card went to decision. And remember those 3 title fights? Well, with all of those going to 5-round decisions, the UFC extended its 3-hour limit on pay-per-view broadcasts, and stubborn cable providers refused to extend the window, so the show was literally cut off in the middle of the main event. Angry fans demanded refunds, and everyone lost a ton of money. And to this day, Dana White refers to UFC 33 whenever a less than stellar card happens. Number 4, UFC 223. So what did we do to deserve the chaos of UFC 223? The card originally featured the long-awaited and often delayed fight between Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov. We would, however, be denied this yet again just days before the fight, when the interim champion Ferguson reportedly tripped over a wire and tore a ligament in his knee. Featherweight champion Max Holloway stepped up on super short short notice for the super fight we never knew we wanted, and everything was good, right? Well, it was until the displaced lightweight champion Conor McGregor crashed the Barclays Center to attack Nurmagomedov in retaliation for an incident with teammate Artem Lobov. Flying dollies, airborne trash cans, and broken glass did their part in further hurting the lineup, as Ray Borg and Michael Chiesa were medically ruled out of their bouts, and the sport's biggest was wanted by the NYPD. While McGregor was standing before a judge the next day, the card continued evolving at a near comical pace. Holloway's weight-cutting complications scratched him. Anthony Pettis, who was originally set to fight Chiesa, volunteered to fill in, but the UFC was unwilling to meet Pettis' financial demand, so Paul Felder was called, but the NYSAC thought he wasn't ranked high enough, so the original opponent Al Iaquinta was finally booked instead. And despite him not weighing in at the 155 title limit, he would face Nurmagomedov for the undisputed belt. Fortunately, the Eagle won and prevented a potential regulatory mess, with the Athletic Commission formally stating it would not recognize Iaquinta as a champion if he won. Number 3, ELITEXC Heat. When ELITEXC signed Kimbo Slice, it was easy money. Among the original viral stars, Kimbo captured the attention of so many fans that the promotion decided to center itself around the Florida-born street fighter. And shortly after his signing, the company secured a major network TV deal with CBS. And obviously, Kimbo was the featured attraction. So when he was paired with UFC Hall of Famer Ken Shamrock for the third CBS outing, it was a surefire hit. However, an apparent accident drilling a choke technique on fight day cut Shamrock above his eye, and the Florida State Athletic Commission pulled the plug on the world's most dangerous man, leaving the ELITEXC to scramble for a replacement. They tapped little-known Seth Petrozelli from the undercard to fill it in, and in just 14 seconds, Kimbo fell to punches, and Petrozelli was declared the unlikely winner. Later, Petrozelli would say that he was asked by the promotion to not take the fight to the ground in an obvious attempt to stack the deck in favor of its star, and he even claims that he was offered extra money for this request. The company was already in debt, and with the sudden fall of its standout personality, investors, well, they didn't come running to save the brand. But when the Florida Commission announced its intentions of investigating Petrozelli's remarks about promoter interference, the company quickly shut its doors. Number 2, Affliction Trilogy. Affliction went from being a clothing brand associated with MMA to a full-scale promotional fight organization. Coming out of the gate with the intention of competing with the UFC, the company, led by the improbable combination of a future US president, a now incarcerated attorney, and a boxer turned clueless promoter, did their best to acquire key talent and put on grand shows. Among the big names were Fedor Emelianenko and Josh Barnett. Fedor was easily the best talent that never stepped foot in the UFC, and Barnett was a marquee heavyweight who once held the UFC title before a failed steroid test forced the belt from his hands. And the two would meet in the third Affliction event, Trilogy. But only 11 days before the event, the California State Athletic Commission refused to license Barnett because, well, you guessed it, anabolic steroids. Unable to find a suitable replacement on such short notice, Fedor was left without an opponent and Affliction was left without a main event. The dominoes continued to fall and Affliction decided to just cancel the entire thing. With shaky finances to begin with and the sudden costs of putting together Trilogy, Affliction was forced to close the books on its promotional efforts. The other scheduled fighters included Tim Sylvia, Mark Hominick, Ben Rothwell, Paul Daly, and Gegard Mousasi. Oh, what could have been. Number 1, Pentagon Combat. To make a long story short, the world of Brazilian Vale Tudo was dominated by the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu clan and Luta Livre. Resembling the Kung Fu movie feuds between different schools, this rivalry played out for years and resulted in old school dojo challenges and violent street encounters that required police intervention. So at 1997's Pentagon Combat, when Renzo Gracie and Luta Livre representative Eugenio Tardo met, there was a lot more under the surface. The tension could be felt watching the non-stop, nearly 15-minute bare-knuckle fight. Members of the crowd with their obvious allegiances slowly but surely made their way closer and closer to the cage throughout the bout, and eventually they were hanging onto the fence, with some even beginning to climb it. Renzo later complained about some of these audience members kicking him through the fence. Apparently he even managed to sucker punch one. When members of the Gracie family attacked that same person, Lucha Libre reps retaliated, and the whole scene descended into a full-scale riot. Obviously, the fight couldn't continue and is officially listed on Sherdog as a no contest due to the fans going insane. News outlets covered the wild scene, giving their fear-mongering against MMA extra ammunition, but in reality did nothing to stop the growth of the sport, especially in Brazil. The bright side is that the incident is credited as the finale of the feud. Thanks so much to the big man on campus, Anthony Walker. Wow, you're huge! For writing this list, you can follow him at AmpWalkerMMA, and thanks so much to the Irish sensation Tomas Welsh for editing it. You can follow him at Big Beat Visual on Instagram.
Mixed martial arts is full of emotion. The athletes literally put their well-being at risk to test their skills and put on a show for the fans, who are sometimes incredibly brutal. The vast majority of the time when the final horn sounds, both fighters embrace to give each other credit for a job well done, acknowledging that regardless the outcome, there is a mutual respect. Even after some of the